Okay, next I'm talking about the Valken V12 HPA engine. The Valken V12 is actually designed as a pre-built gun. This engine is primarily sold as an engine installed into pre-built guns designed for it, or they're off-the-shelf AEGs that this has been installed into. But they now offer a drop-in gearbox replacement, which is this unit right here. Based on my discussion with Valken, their orientation for this is really toward possibly the rental market, maybe the younger market, and you'll see why it's tailored for that kind of environment. So let's first talk about some of the advantages of the Valken V12. An advantage of this is that the Valken V12 doesn't have an external FCU. It's all inside this engine, and I'll show that to you here in a second. It only has a battery connector coming out the back of it. So you attach the battery and you're good to go. It actually should just work. So you don't have to worry about an FCU getting damaged or the wire harness getting damaged. So it's a definite advantage by making it very simple. You have just a battery cable coming out the back. It's pretty easy to maintain. By its design, you can see that it's got a cast gearbox shell. It looks like some CNC parts to it, but the front end of it is actually plastic. So on this, you only have to take off the front plastic part of the gearbox to access the front cylinder, which you can then easily remove by unscrewing the banjo valve at the front of this cylinder here, and then unscrewing the front cylinder to access the nozzle. And you can do this while the gearbox is still in the gun on a standard V2. Comes out, nozzle pops right out, and there you go. You can lubricate or change the nozzle and then reinstall it, and without ever having to take this off. So this plastic front piece here allows that to happen. Now, this design actually has the same max FPS capabilities like the Polar Fusion engine. It uses a Poppet cylinder. I'm going to show you that as well. And so its max FPS is in the same range. It should be able to go close to 700 FPS and down. It also uses the same technique of having different nozzle inner diameters. So you can get different nozzles for the V12 to control what the FPS ranges are going to be. So it's the same principle. I'm going to leave this off because I'm going to open this up for you here. Let's see. It has all the same functions as the Polar FCU, but it's controlled again inside here, and I think it actually has a couple extra functions that the Polar FCU can't do. But it's controlled by trigger programming, and I'm going to cover that in a second. The way it's handled is by moving the fire select switch from safe to semi-auto and pulling the trigger. You can actually do the programming on this, and I'll explain that with the little programming sheet that I have right here. Let's see, it's a forward bias nozzle, so the same advantages that I described on the Polar engine by having a forward bias nozzle. Air seal can be checked. It blocks BBs from going into the hop-up, but again, it's not good for scissor-based guns. It doesn't drain the battery either. If you've left the battery attached to this engine, it's no problem. There's no active display, so it won't drain. And it works fine with 11.1 LiPos as well, so that's not an issue for this engine. What's also nice is when you get the engine by itself, they actually include a nice maple leaf bucking and hop-up spacer with it, but it does not come with a battery. You're left to get your own battery. It does come with a HPA fitting, I believe is in the box here somewhere. So you have an HPA fitting that comes with it, and the bucking, so that's another nice advantage. I'm going to go ahead and take this apart while I talk about some of the potential disadvantages of the V12. One thing to note about this gun, and actually before I completely take it apart, is it's a V2 gearbox design. and it's a very strict V2 gearbox. It's not designed to be put into other guns that use V2s but aren't standard. This is really designed solely for M4 and AR variants, primarily because the selector switch, which again is set up for AR type of guns, M4s, is proprietary. This is not a standard selector switch, even though it does have standard mount points here. The selector switch goes inside of the gearbox and activates switches on the inside, so you can't replace this with anything else. So this will not drop into a SCAR, this will not drop into an MP5, it won't drop into anything else. It's meant just for V2s. Now again, its target market is maybe rental guns or pre-packaged guns, so it's designed to fit in the gun that it came with, and that's really what it is. It's set for that. So a disadvantage is it's not designed to fit into anything else but a standard stock V2. It also, even if it uses a standard M4 selector plate, this doesn't have all the, you just can't make the same kind of adjustments to it. There's no way to shim this, for example, because it's in a captured gearbox shell. The cylinder is where it is. You can't move this. So if this goes into a gun where it's not aligned, you're gonna have to find a different way of shimming it to get that thing aligned. So it again has a very targeted installation platform. It's got to go into a V2. So let me open this up and talk about some other issues here. Okay. It's easier to maintain the nozzle, so you notice there's still a lot of screws you got to take to open up the gearbox, but you only have to take off the front cap to get to the nozzle. But let's open up this proprietary shell. I mean, it's designed just for the V12. It's cast, but it's made just for this gun. Okay, here's a look at the internals of the V12. I mentioned already that it's got a proprietary selector plate. It also has a proprietary trigger. This trigger activates this small micro switch here by an extra tab that's hanging off the tail of the trigger. Standard AEG triggers don't have that, so you can't replace the trigger with something else. Again, this is all designed to be one unit. You notice that the FCU, or the control board, is molded to fit, or cut to fit, this gearbox and the mount points of this gearbox. So again, very proprietary to this, and it's meant to stay as it is. It's designed with rear wiring. There really isn't a way to run this out the front, unless, I don't actually think that this slot is made for that, but it's just for rear wiring. So if you try to put this in a gun with front wiring, you're going to actually have a problem with that. Okay, let's go ahead and take this engine out, and you can see that it is also got a poppet cylinder, a nozzle cylinder, and it's driven by two solenoids in the back here. In fact, I'm going to open this up so we can take a closer look at all the internals. It has two solenoid lines which go onto the trigger board here, trigger control board. The lines actually aren't marked, which is kind of interesting. Now, it's not expected that most people will come into these things and mess around with the internals, but at some point you're going to want to lubricate the poppet cylinder in here, and you can easily get these two connectors in correct. Now, I've actually marked mine, made sure I knew which one was which, and I marked that the left side solenoid goes to the rear connector and the right side solenoid goes to the right connector, or the forward connector. So I marked it with a black mark so I can know that they both go back to which ones. Alright, let's take apart the cylinder here, and you can see that it has a nozzle. It looks very similar to a Polar nozzle. It is not exactly the same. They're different, slightly different specs on the nozzle, so those are not interchangeable. We can take a look at the Poppet Solenoid and see how it's designed. When you open up this Poppet, it has a very similar design to the Polar Poppet. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and take the locking O-ring out here, and you can actually see how it's built, and it's basically the same Poppet design. In fact, I actually put a Polar Poppet in here and it worked perfectly fine, just to see. But so it has the same advantages and disadvantages. When you have a Poppet design like this, your FPS can go way up. You control it by the nozzle. You have all the same settings on the control board, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. But it has all the same capabilities. Now, I'll just go ahead and put this O-ring back in here. Okay, same solenoids. I think it's a different model number than what's on the Polar Star one. It uses different connectors here, but the same weaknesses would exist. I haven't worked with these enough to know if there's any leaking issues with this, but if dirt gets in there, I'm sure you'll have the same kind of problem. So you want to be careful with the V12 not to let dirt get in there and affect these solenoids that are on the back cylinder of this. Okay, let's talk about the trigger control, and I think I can actually do this without even having the engine plugged in. I'm going to find out. I haven't tried that before. But here's, I think, the largest disadvantage, frankly, to the V12 system is how you program this thing. You plug in the battery, and you go from safe to semi-auto, and you'll see that there's a little light that goes on. Now, if you hold your trigger down when you go from safe to semi-auto, it goes into programming mode, and you can see that there's a green light. I'll do it for the forward camera here. There's a slight green light right in this hole there. And just to note, you can actually see that light reflecting against the trigger, because the way this is installed into a gun, you're not supposed to use the pin that goes through here called the Flora pin. Excuse me, Flora pin, or I call it the trigger pin. So you can see this light. But if you do need that pin installed for this gearbox, for this engine, you can actually see the light reflecting against the trigger. So you have to look at it upside down. Now here's how you actually program it. There's no FCU. It's part of the engine itself. You have to do it through trigger pulses. Okay, you go into programming mode by holding the trigger back and going from safe to semi-auto. And you'll see that this green light turns on. And now each subsequent pull of the trigger will go through the different programming modes. And there's a little cheat sheet that they include that tell you what each of the different programming modes are. It cycles from green, you pull it once, it goes to blue, it goes to red, and then purple, which is just the red and the blue at the same time. And then it goes to a flashing green, a flashing blue, a flashing red, and then there's a flashing purple, and then you're back to the nozzle, back to the first setting. Each one of these settings, there's one called cycle nozzle back timing, cycle nozzle forward timing, cycle valve timing, rate of fire, select fire mode, and so forth. You change the values by pulling the trigger. So for example, the cycle nozzle forward timing, each trigger pull is 1 millisecond and its default is 25. So you go to that mode and you push and hold until the light goes out. And now when you let go, it starts flashing. So you got to start counting these flashes, because that's going to tell you what its current setting is. And I've already lost track. I know it's actually at 25 because I reset it to default, but you're at this point now counting how many did it do. Now if I want to change it, I got to count 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I guess I'm up to maybe about 25 now. And then you wait a few seconds and it'll accept it and the light comes back on. Now if you want to verify what the value was, you push and hold, it'll flash, and now you got to count. Okay, honestly this is a little frustrating. You have, especially for the higher values, when you have to count to 25, this can take forever to program. So honestly, once you get it set, you just don't want to touch it, because programming this can be very, very tedious. And you have to keep this cheat sheet with you until you finally memorize each of the settings. And there's 8 different things you can change on the settings. So, you know, I got to be honest, that's the biggest disadvantage. Programming this is extremely difficult. Now, I'm not a paintball guy, so I'm not used to doing this kind of mode of programming. I guess paintball guns used to do it this way as well. But having to count lights for programming it is a little bit difficult. Now again, in its target market, where this might be in a rental gun or in a younger set gun where they won't even go into the programming mode, it'd be set and you just leave it alone, it works great. You don't have to do anything. You just plug in the battery, plug in the air, and you're good to go. But if you ever need to do any tweaking, this could be a little bit tedious. So be aware of that. The programming is a little bit difficult, and if you can deal with it, then that's great. That you can actually do some really nice things with this. It has some really good settings. There's also one other disadvantage. It's burst mode. There's only one burst mode, which is 3-round burst. You don't have a 5, 6, 7, or whatever. You have either semi-only, full auto, or 3-round burst. So you don't get the variations with that. Let's see. It's more expensive than the SMP, but less expensive than the Polar Star. So it sits right in between. So I think that's about it. I'm trying to think of other things. Again, for its target market, it's probably really good. If you're someone who's pretty advanced, or someone like me that basically spends his days customizing things, this could be a little bit difficult to work with. And again, because it's very purpose-built, this is not designed to be customized in any way. It's not really designed for me. And in fact, when I talked to the Valken people, they said this isn't designed for you, because I do custom installs. But they wanted me to give my opinion on it, so there you have it. It has essentially the same performance envelope and characteristics as the Polar Star. Its internals, honestly, are very, very similar. But the programming of the FCU, which is done through the trigger, is good and bad depending on if you really mess with it a lot. If you don't mess with it and it's in a standard M4, excellent. You'll probably leave your battery connected to it all day and not have a problem. But if you want to change something, you're going to be counting light flashes, and that could be a little bit problematic. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks for sitting through this long video, and post up if you have any questions. Of the excuse me. Intro, take 5. Take 6. Take 8. I'm going to take 9. A review between the 3 major fusion engines.